What's up guys, Alec on Carey here. Today I want to cover a topic that I get asked about quite often, and that is how best to use the Olympic lifts to build power and athleticism. So basically, without going into too much depth, I want to cover three main topics today. And for starters, there are athleticism. Kind of, what is that? It's kind of a broad and somewhat meaningless term without context. So what facets of that idea are we even hoping to improve by incorporating these lifts into our training? 2, what variations of these lifts should we perform to best and most efficiently accomplish this goal? And 3, how should we actually perform them? How often? How heavy should we go? How many sets and reps should we do? Etc., etc. So today I just want to touch on those topics as briefly as I can keep it. And like always, I'm just trying to keep things practical for you guys. And since I'm doling out free advice again, I think I should start by prefacing all my informative videos with this quick little disclaimer for all the people who are obsessed with what my credentials are. And that is, this advice is based on my actual experience. It's not based on scientific studies, and I'm not a sports scientist. Ironically, however, I am shredded. In fact, though, my college degree is completely unrelated to the field of physical training. It's not in kinesiology or exercise science or even nutrition. And 90% of what I've learned over the years in this regard has been through trial, error, and self-education. And if you have a problem with that, there's the door. Because if you seriously think that years and years of real-world experience and countless hours of self-directed research and learning on one's own have no value as compared to a degree, then you're a very small-minded person. And you and I probably don't have much of anything productive to discuss. So with that out of the way, let's get to the fun stuff. So regarding athleticism, I'll start by saying that what we're really aiming to do here with these lifts is kind of increase the horsepower behind your athletic movements. So your ability to accelerate and even decelerate quickly and efficiently, your ability to absorb large amounts of force very quickly and without a hitch, your ability to take a quick and powerful first step and change direction seamlessly and more fluidly. Those sorts of things. The fractions of a second here and there that separate the good athletes from the great athletes. There are guys who, no matter what the circumstances are, always seem to be able to create that little half step of space that they need, right? And that's what we are looking to improve here. Essentially, we're using these lifts to try to enhance global athletic capacity. They're not going to magically give you skills that you don't already have. So if you've never attempted to cut or stop on a dime before, then don't expect any miracles. But if you get good at them, they will enhance what you already have. They'll train you to absorb and expel force more seamlessly and more powerfully than you do now. And with practice, that'll lead to faster first steps, quicker and harder cuts, and a greater propensity to accelerate and decelerate quickly. And these attributes are applicable to pretty much all major athletic endeavors, which is why these lifts are so popular when it comes to training for sport in the first place. It's starting to thunder now, so if you get some rumbling in the background, I apologize for that. But anyway, moving on to the second point that I want to cover. That is, what variations of these lifts are going to be best to accomplish this goal. And the thing about the full Olympic lifts, and this is really what they're notorious for, is that they have a very steep learning curve. In fact, these lifts are so technical that if someone isn't taught them from the time that they're a child, then they probably don't have a very good chance of ever getting anywhere very far in the sport of Olympic weightlifting. But that really only applies to the full Olympic lifts. The clean and the snatch done from the floor and caught in a full squat position are incredibly technical. The snatch is probably the most technically demanding exercise that you can do with a barbell, in fact. But if we break the lifts up and focus more on the components that we actually need and that are actually beneficial for our goals, if we use the lifts as a means rather than an end, we can get the full athleticism enhancing benefits of the lifts while not only drastically decreasing the technical requirements of them and making for a much more user-friendly learning curve, but also making for a much more trainable exercise overall for athletes and lifters who don't have an excess of free free training time or energy to devote to high frequency technical work on these lifts, and who didn't start training these motor patterns when they were 6 years old. As an added bonus, the variations that I'm going to recommend are much less stressful to the body overall than the full Olympic lifts. But in terms of athletic enhancement, the results will be just the same. So by now, you're probably asking yourself, how the hell do we accomplish all this then? And the answer is pretty simple actually. The hang power versions of the lifts should be your bread and butter. And just real quick so you can see what I'm talking about, I'm going to show you guys a few examples so that you can see the differences for yourselves. First up here is a full snatch. So the barbell is pulled off the floor, transitioned directly into the second pull, and then caught in a full squat position. Contrast that with the hang power snatch shown here. Here I break up the first and the second pulls by first picking the barbell up off the floor and then setting up the second pull from the high hang position over the knees. And then finally I catch the bar in an athletic stance partial squat position rather than in a full squat. Next up is a clean and jerk. Here it's the same deal as the snatch. The bar is pulled off the floor, I transition directly and immediately into the second pull, and then I catch the weight in a full squat position, and then finally jerk it overhead. Now, contrast that with a hang power clean, and again, I break up the first and the second pull, performing the second pull from a high hang position, and catching the barbell once again in a partial squat. And then next up here, we have an example of jerks done out of the rack instead of after a clean, which this just lets you focus on the actual jerk a little bit more so since you don't have to worry about getting the bar from the floor to your shoulders first. And finally, we have the snatch grip high pull, also done from the high hang position. With this variation, you can just kind of load up the weight and heave at the barbell as powerfully as possible because you don't have to worry about actually successfully catching the bar on your shoulders or overhead like you do with the power clean and the power snatch, respectively. That makes it a good variation to really hone in on the power building aspect of it if you're careful to maintain proper pulling height with the barbell and not shortchange how much power you're putting into the bar since you don't have to actually catch it. So that's just a few examples of the Olympic lift variations that I recommend if you want to focus on using the lift simply to build power and enhance athleticism. These variations aren't going to make you an Olympic lifter. In fact, they'll probably make you a worse Olympic lifter than you would have already been anyway. But they will certainly help to make you a better athlete. So it's important to always remember context. But anyway, so the key points here are just to 1, perform the lift from the hang. I usually stick with the high hang position these days, and the reason for that is twofold. For one, there's less to screw up. We've already eliminated the transition over the knees, which is arguably the most technical component of the entire Olympic lifts. So that's good right there. And for our purposes now, the less we have to move the bar up the thighs to get it into the power position, the better. Because that means we're more likely to hit the most optimal spot more often, which is going to help us to train more effectively and build more power in the long run. And secondly, this shortened pulling distance actually gives you less time to accelerate the barbell, which means that you actually have to impart more force into the barbell with less time and therefore produce more power to get the bar onto your shoulders or overhead than if you had already started moving the barbell from a position that was closer to the floor. And aside from performing the lifts from the hang, the second key point is to catch the bar in a shallow squat position rather than in a full squat. Again, the former is far less technically demanding than the latter, but also it forces you to produce more power. With a full Olympic lift, half the battle is beating gravity to get underneath of the barbell before it comes crashing down. In fact, the best Olympic lifters in the world are known for how fast that they can get underneath the barbell, not how high that they can pull it. But with the power versions, that's not really an issue anymore. The focus isn't so much getting yourself under the barbell as it is getting the barbell over top of yourself. This allows you to focus on pulling the bar as hard and high as possible, which is going to build maximal power in the long run. As such, for athletic development, your focus with these should simply be to catch the bar in as high of a squat position as you possibly can, as shallow of a squat as possible. This also forces you to instantly absorb the entire force of the weight so that it doesn't pull you down after you've racked the bar onto your shoulders or over your head. which is another bonus for athletic development. Now, if you're just performing high pulls and you don't have to worry about actually catching the bar, then your primary focus should just be on imparting as much force into the barbell as possible with every single rep, and as such, pulling it as high as you possibly can. Now, obviously you want to put enough weight on the bar that you can only pull it to about your nipple line, but you guys get the point. So to close out this section, in case you're lost at this point, for optimal enhancement of athleticism, the Olympic lift variations that I stick to myself these days, and the only ones that I really recommend for athletic enhancement anymore, are the hang power clean, the hang power snatch, the snatch grip high pull, also done from the hang, and the... We'll wait this one out. And the jerk done out of the rack or off boxes. And finally, the last thing I want to touch on is frequencies and loading protocols and set and rep schemes. Now, the frequency thing is kind of dependent on what phase of training that you're in, but the lifts can be done anywhere from 1 to 3 times a week depending on how much space that you have available in your program and what physical qualities you're trying to work on at that time. If you're really trying to build up your base of power and you're currently taking some time away from things like sprints and jump squats and resisted sprints and all that stuff, then 2 to 3 times a week would probably be ideal in that case. On the other hand, if you're focusing more so on your running and jumping abilities during whatever particular time period, then it's probably best to tone the Olympic lifts down to just once a week, which is going to be more of a maintenance level. Now, in terms of loading protocols, you're generally going to want to live in approximately the 75 to 85% range, percent of 1 rep max, for these lifts for the majority of the time. Remember, we're trying to build power, and maximal power is a marriage between strength and speed, which means that you need to be able to accelerate the bar to a sufficient degree in order to reach peak power levels on a particular rep. And that doesn't happen on these lifts when you're using maximum weights. The power output actually drops off a bit in heavier weights because it's simply impossible to accelerate the bar as fast as you can with slightly lighter weights. So 75% to 85% is a general rule of thumb as far as intensity level goes. Obviously, the goal should be to progressively increase the weights that represent 75% and 85% of your 1 rep max over time, but that's another topic altogether. And lastly, as far as sets and reps go, personally, I like to stick to a minimum of 5 sets per session, but sometimes I'll do anywhere from 6 and all the way up to 8 sets also, depending on how many times a week that I'm training the lifts or how much energy I have, how much free time I have for that session, whatever. There's nothing cut and dry. But anyway, I would say pretty much like 80% of the time, you're going to want to stick with triples on these exercises. That's really the sweet spot before where power output starts to decline. You can also go all the way up to 5 reps sometimes when the weight is lighter, and you can mess around with singles and doubles occasionally as well. But the best results will be seen by simply focusing on doing a lot of crisp, high quality repeat triples in the 75 to 85% range with adequate rest in between sets and a focus on accelerating the barbell as fast as possible with every single rep. And I think that pretty much covers it. This dragged on a bit longer than I wanted it to, but like I've always said, brevity ain't my strong suit, and neither is having academic credentials, but that's okay because achieving outstanding results is my fucking strong suit. And that's all I got for today, guys. If you have any questions about the lifts, feel free to shoot them over to me and I'll answer them as best as I can, or maybe even turn the best ones into another video on this topic. Other than that, if you're interested in online coaching, send me an email at ankiri.elite@gmail.com and I'd be happy to pass some more information your way. Keep training hard and I will catch you guys next time.